I think being a girl and surfing, and also being as good as I was back then, I challenged a lot of stereotypes. So it's often, I think, depending on how strongly the male audience and male surfers believe the narratives that they're told. At times it's often confronting, depending on what lineups. Some lineups are better than others, and definitely as I've gotten older, there has been an increased amount. However, there's still not too many surfs that I have where I don't come across a man who feels entitled to either my time or my skill, or feeling like they can outbeat me in the ocean. It's often quite funny because in the end, like, I'm obviously going to smoke them and they have no chance. So, and then I think they realize that really quick, and then it almost infuriates them more, and you're not actively doing this on purpose. And so when I was younger, I had no idea that the amount of people that I would upset just by being a woman in the water, and even having those same men come back to me after I've won more titles, be like, oh yeah, I remember you, like when you were younger. I'm like, yeah, me too. He's like, oh yeah, I dropped in on you all the time. I'm like, yeah, you did. Like, I know. I don't forget. And it's funny now because obviously after a certain amount of years, people see you very differently. But yeah, I think gender has always played a massive role. And also probably why I've always had a little bit of an attitude, for sure. And yeah, the nuances, the more you look at it. And I think one of the things that I probably didn't realize when I was younger is that I didn't know how nuanced it was to be me in the water, or to challenge a stereotype that men had. So yeah, it was quite interesting. I reached the WSL when I was like 16, so I was quite young. And I think when it comes to being a woman in surfing, 13 years ago now, you have to look, the obvious ones, equal pay. We weren't paid. The same as what the men were. Actually, honestly, it's appalling what we were paid back then. And that was apparent in my life a lot because, I was one of 3 professional surfers in my family. I had 2 brothers, so I knew what they got paid. So this is not something that I was unaware of from day one. I do find what's interesting is the stories that I believed, the narratives that I believed when I was younger, that, women weren't as good, and that was common things we'd hear, like, oh, the women aren't as good. And you're like, I didn't realize the questions about that statement until I was a fair bit older. So I was angry and I was mad, but I was just, the environment was normalized that the women weren't good, or the women didn't deserve to be paid equal, or all the different narratives. If you wanted to be a successful woman in surfing, you had to be like kind of skinny, blonde, or that was that kind of whole sex sells era, which now that I look back on it, it's just absolutely appalling. And I'm like, where are the adults in the room? Because there clearly wasn't any. And even then, like, so when you look at all those things and like you're 16 and you don't know these things, like, you don't know why you're so angry. You don't know why your brothers get paid more than you, but you have outperformed them at every corner. You are better than them in every category that you're in. And it's not in the sense of like comparisons to those individuals. But when you're looking at a marketing campaign or a company like that, you're like, okay, you've got one athlete that has clearly excelled, continuing to excel, has gone from, child star to young adult to world champion, and then to continue not to be seen or valued as equal, or that your work is all valued close to equal, not even 50% of equal. And these barriers are still being faced today, and in this, and also in this, like, intersectionally, I know that, like, I'm not a woman of color, and I'm not a black woman, or I'm not a black person in surfing, and I also know that it is complicated, the nuances in and the intersections in surfing. So and that was just around equal pay. I think what I see on the tour right now, I feel really proud to be a part of it. I feel really proud that not only the WSL's like front office and administration and their push for equality is ongoing and continuous, and there's also women in those positions. So on the tour right now, I think we actually have a really good collective, and it's always going to have to be improved, like that, not saying that. So I think that's not where the biggest issues I feel are. I feel sometimes the bigger issues are in, say, like boardrooms, when they're mostly made up of white males, or marketing departments when they're made up of 40-year-old white dudes. I find those areas, and I don't think those people really know how much power they hold on what everyone else sees as well. And then also I have noticed in community levels, like, and then you're getting into smaller towns, and like, I'm from a really small town, like, I know the different things, and like, it's always funny because now you got young girls and young boys, and it really is dependent on the club and who's involved in the club, and if women are involved in the club. Like, I think it's been proven time and time again that having women involved in sport is for the better. And so it's around these communities, smaller communities, I feel like have really, when you got to look at the sort of narratives that in grassroots that there is, if there's there's the Australian board riders national team thing, I think it's called the ABB, is like, I think 5 dudes, 1 woman, and the 1 woman's mandatory, and like, and I get it, and they're like, oh, but there's not enough participation, but again, that's your grassroots, is 5 to 1, and sometimes clubs struggle to get the 1, and you got to look at the environment that they're creating for women in grassroots, and that's all the way through. The top level doesn't mean that it's exempt, but I just think there's a lot of people trying to move the needle at every level, and we will always need more people to do that. Honestly, I'm just like most women. I know so many women that have to still get up and go to work, go to school, raise kids, every possible situation that women are in. It's the same way they do it. Is you kind of do what you can, you read. I honestly, my biggest thing is like learning more about my cycle, what's normal, what's not normal, and then also realizing that the medical system hasn't really been super crash hot for women, and that it's pretty lackluster when it comes to finding out answers for women as well, and without really serious things like getting surgery or and so I feel like in this area, I feel like a lot of other women out there that have just researched as much as they can and try and find different ways to support themselves through their menstrual cycle. I think we have more women working in surfing. We have a few women in quite powerful positions, which is nice. And I think too, like, in those situations, I think people have to understand that when women are in those situations, it doesn't mean that their whole industry is cleared of, treating people on gender goes away like that just because there is women in more powerful positions. I think it's a process and one that takes a long time to turn the ship around. I think too, like, the access women now have to more women. Like, it's no longer controlled by massive marketing campaigns. I feel like social media has been a gift in that sense, and even TikTok and the amount of women's stories that I hear now, purely because I'm on TikTok and I watch women and I watch things, sports and women in business and women in entrepreneurs and essentially just women educators, and I feel like having more access to women's stories, and I hope that everyone gets access to women's stories, but I feel like that's been one of the biggest changes for me, is that the access that I've been able to have over the last 5-6 years maybe to women's stories, and that's a lot of that's also me going out and finding them, and now but I think that's some of the bigger changes that I've seen since sending the women out in subpar conditions. And look, that wasn't that long ago. That's in my generation. So what? I've been doing this 13 years now. I'm 29, and so yeah, let's keep it. It's not that long ago that we were still doing that. Yeah, 100%. I think you can see the influence of patriarchy everywhere. You can see the sexism, racism, like homophobia is in there. Like, I think that's one of the things I didn't understand when I was younger, was how much that, these structures and how much on land influences in the water. And I always thought it was kind of separate because it's a confusing, being a competitor, it's a confusing environment to be in, because I feel like people are quite often saying, oh yes, the women are so great, but also the way they treat women on land is not that. And I think it's actually reshaped how I view so many people in the world. It is their standpoint on, and their understanding of intersectionality, and their understanding of like how nuanced life is really. And so I completely agree with SheShaka's findings, because I think any woman that goes in the water has experienced that, and we don't not experience that. It's in the land, it's in the water. I don't think it's separate, and I think it's like surfing's funny like that, because I feel like we think we're so much better than where we actually are, But you break it down and you have so many people that will still go and be like, oh yeah, the women are surfing so great, like, but how they actually treat women is appalling. So, and it reshapes your view of everything. It's reshaped mine. The more I learned, the more I realized I was so angry about so many different things because around inequality and intersectionality, and you kind of just, it reshapes how you see things. I think, yes, for sure, like in different ways. Like, I think not so much surfing itself, because sometimes it's like a really kind of work orientated space for me at times, but what I find is my space is like just being in the ocean and being around people that love and respect the ocean is like where I feel really connected. And I think one of the other bits is this, like, we are incredibly privileged to be able to travel around the world and be connected to Indigenous cultures and First Nations people wherever we go, and be able to be connecting to community that way, connecting to the land and the stories in the ocean. And I think for me, that part has been incredibly healing and incredibly restoring for me over the years. Like to see men putting more effort. Like, it's clear that it's not good enough, and it's most of the time women having these discussions, and it's most of the time women doing the work. And I know I've been incredibly lucky to have like a few men in my life that have been incredibly staunch in their support, and I would love to see more men reflect on how they partake in patriarchy, how they partake, and that just because like you can't just let things go doesn't mean you're not the problem either. Like, you just the same. And yeah, like I think I think I've been in so many situations in the water where you come across an angry old dude. You're like, what are you angry about? Like, you're in the ocean, the sun's out, everyone's catching waves, like, chill. So, like, yeah, like, I think I would love that women keep, even though these spaces right now sometimes are challenging, that I know, look, honestly, we're women, so we'll always show up. But yeah, I'd love for more men to.